Hello, what's up?
Indeed, what is up? It has been quite some time.
Yes, it has. You have a cane.
I've seen a lot in the past couple of months.
Hmm,
Recuperating from some decisions I made and the repercussions that came from them.
well, shit. All right, let's get out of the way here. Well, you definitely seem dressed for incognito, as it were.
Going for the flagrant approach.
Yeah, so I was about to say it's very, very vibrant.
One of
It's like you
many.
want to be seen by everyone, but you also don't want to be seen by anyone.
As long as they see me as someone else, I suppose that's the important thing, but I know everyone has different approaches, and I've been mixing mine up a little bit.
Always good, I suppose.
How have you been?
Oh, I've been away. I've been in Chicago with my wife. We've been mostly living a very carefree life. I have a poodle.
A poodle?
Yes, Mr. Moida.
Fistimoida.
Yes, Mr. Moida. He's the greatest that's ever lived, and he will kill a motherfucker very quickly.
Mm.
That kind of poodle.
Love an aptly anointed name.
Yes, of course, of course. So, have you been? Okay, so I'll be blunt. I actually don't know any of what you've been through since the last time we spoke. And like, because the last time we spoke, I was dealing with, some folks from my own camp, some very needy folks.
It's a long
Um,
time ago.
yes, yes, yes.
A lot
Which,
has changed since then.
hmm, I see. Well, to my understanding, you got into some trouble at some point.
Putting it lightly.
Hmm. Okay. Well, how heavy was it?
Do you have an MDT?
I guess I think I do. Yeah, yeah. Here we
Here,
go.
I'll give you an option to look up my name, and I'll hear your first impressions, and I shall give perspective following that.
Okay. Let's see. Let's see here. Oh dear. That's okay. Okay. Oh. Okay. Oh. Okay. That's a lot right there. That's a lot of numbers.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Oh. Mm-hmm. Hmm. Oh. That's an interesting two words right there that come to mind. Okay, okay. Mass murder of a government employee.
Mm.
Wait, what? Okay, wait. That's confusing. That's a weird word. Okay, so attempted mass murder of a government employee. So you attempted to mass murder one government employee?
I think it's one charge of that.
Right. Okay. Uh. Oh. Escaping. Okay. Oh. Okay. Well then. Well then. That's a
I've
lot.
been busy.
You've been busy. You've been real busy.
So, needless to say, Babylon went out in a very audacious style. There was a
Hmm.
raid for all of the, I'll be blunt, all of the guns and drugs that were being manufactured there. Stand here and say that we were doing it to protect ourselves from the Faceless and others that were attacking us, but that wouldn't be entirely true. Nor would I take you as a fool and try to sell that to you. Did I stand by it? No. But did I allow it to happen? Yes. So, therefore, I am complicit. New Babylon fell apart. We all got sent to prison. There was a giant jailbreak. I believe partially facilitated by Hydra, if I recall correctly. About 30 plus people escaped. A bunch of us were on the run for the better part of a month. I ended up getting caught, then held until a presumed trial would take place. Made another attempt to escape after the clowns tried to break someone else out. I was unsuccessful. Then a lot of us Babylonians tried to rebuild our resistance from inside prison. We ended up taking over Bolingbroke in an effort to make a stand and hopefully expedite our court date to some degree, but then it ended up turning into something else. While Babylonians were being charged with treason without intentionally, explicitly acting in a treasonous manner, Cleveland, which is what we renamed Bolingbroke, was explicitly treasonous. And what started out as an ideological railing against, the government and the injustices, therefore, turned into, well, with any movement, if the wrong people are galvanized by it, it will be used as a reason to cause senseless violence and completely bastardize the original intent of the cause. Some of them even started working with and accepting help from the Faceless. That, thankfully, crumbled in short order after defending ourselves from the marshals and the officers for about 2 weeks. We ended up lasting a lot longer than expected. I took umbrage with the way that things were being handled in Cleveland, and it reached a breaking point where I turned my gun on someone, and I don't know how many others, they turned their guns on me in turn. Doctors had to remove about 60 plus bullets from my body, and I had to get a lung transplant, so I'm still getting used to breathing properly, so when it gets a little too tiring, it's nice to have this cane to lean on. Then I basically was offered an option for safety. I took it, and quite a few of my compatriots have now been kidnapped by the Faceless in the chaotic aftermath of the collapse of quotation marks Cleveland, so I have been trying.
So wait, before you continue, are you
Yes.
are you currently on the run from the law?
I am not, no.
Okay.
But I am incognito. by virtue
Because
of...
it sounded like you haven't actually had a court date.
Oh, no, I should say I did take a plea deal. It got to the
Ah.
point where either wait in prison forever because they wouldn't be able to... I do not know the legal particulars, but they wouldn't have been able to charge me with certain things, or wouldn't have been able to have the proper court date without all of the defendants there. The particulars are a little lost on me.
It got too complicated for them, so they're
It-
like, listen, here's a deal.
I'm fairly certain that's what it is, and honestly, since I was facing life in prison, this is
I mean, you're
probably
not
the
in
lightest...
prison.
Exactly. This is the lightest tap on the wrist I could have gotten, all things considered. Do I agree with some of the charges? Absolutely not. Do I understand I am very much complicit in the other charges? Yes. Well, the biggest thing that bit me in the ass was constructive possession, because I owned all of the trailers in Babylon,
Oh dear.
where all the fun goodies were stored. Mm-hmm. That's the TLDR of where I was and where I am now.
Quick question: Did did that plea deal involve you having to turn people over?
Nope.
Really?
It involved me promising to cooperate with any information I have about the Faceless, which honestly I'm happy to share anyways.
So it was actually a decent plea deal. You didn't have to like betray anybody.
Nope.
Well, that's so nice.
I
So
think they
nice of the
probably...
government.
Yeah, I know. They probably gathered from the 4-hour interrogation we had that I wasn't really going to say a whole lot.
Mm.
I should note that the 4-hour interrogation was by virtue of me being a circular yapper, not because I had anything substantive
Of course,
to say.
of course. That's the best way to go about it.
But, yeah, a lot has changed. And-
So then, are you? So New Babylon fell.
Mhm.
So then, does that mean that you've all scattered to the wind and have no affiliation, or do you continue to affiliate?
That's a good question. By virtue of what happened with Cleveland, there are
Oh yeah,
some
but they're the
people-
ones who shot you, right?
Mhm.
Fuck. Okay, never mind then. That was a stupid
They're-
question.
No, not a stupid question at all. It's rather confounding with the amount of layers that are involved. Not a stupid question at all. There are some that I do still see as compatriots. Others who I see do not care too much about the time that has been spent or what has happened. They just care about the immediate satisfaction of having a gun in their hand and being able to exercise that power over people that can't defend themselves.
As is the way.
As is the way. All too often, as is the way.
I mean, yeah. Having a gun in your possession, it turns you into, your. I don't even want to say your truest self, but perhaps well, perhaps it does turn you into a bit of a animalistic hunter-gatherer once again, who feels the need to give in to their most base impulses in that moment and not think about the long term. You're only thinking about the short term. Is this going to be a good meal for me now, or am I going to go hungry?
Precisely. I'm not going to sit here and pretend that I'm wholly innocent. I did turn
Well, yeah,
my
you
gun on
shouldn't.
another person. But that's because that person, who was anointed with the position of a sort of judge, jury individual for settling disputes within the prison, former DOC, I should note, was utilizing that position to exercise his own personal vendettas against people. He got Lang Buddha's hand chopped off. And was basically putting to trial anyone that questioned him. I questioned him in front of everyone. Something one could argue is not grounds for any sort of trial, ethical, legal, or otherwise. So, recalling a previous conversation we had about cowardice and taking action, I took his advice, and I shot him. But in turn, and I knew this was likely to happen, but not to the intensity and extent that it did. It was a gamble that I took, and I'm just happy to still be alive.
I mean, yeah. 60 fucking bullets. That's, that's a lot to come back from. I'm surprised you're not at the very least in a wheelchair.
Yeah, it was mostly in the chest. They had to get a lung
that's all.
transplant.
Mostly the chest,
I was wearing a vest, so that kind of helped, but still not great. Had to get my lung replaced. They told me it looked like what was it? A bunch of pencil filings in Play-Doh is how they described it. To be grotesque.
That's I don't expect most of the your insides to have be looking, rather sharp in that context.
Not particularly, no. But with that said, you certainly are visiting San Andreas at a very curious time.
Well, it was described to me by Patrick as doomsday, so...
I think, in many ways, that is very much the case. Ooh, alright. What do you want to hear about first? Another one of the horsemen that have shown their face, or what the Faceless have been doing?
Oh, man. Well, I'm a little bit more interested in this horseman thing.
I figured as much.
Yeah.
So, of course, we know about the manifestations of death and pestilence, the faces they wear, or the vessels that carry them. Presumably, and I know not when or how this happened. My best guess is that it may have either always been a part of him, or something took place when he was kidnapped and tortured by the Faceless. But Cian McNulty has, in not so explicit terms, confirmed that he is the embodiment of famine.
Who is Cian McNulty?
Cian McNulty, I am glad you asked. He is a former sheriff, former marshal, who got fired by virtue of him committing treason by working with the Faceless. He's a very jovial fellow, has auburn hair, beard, pretty long hair. I believe he's been, oh goodness, he's been working at the gas station up in Polito, so you may cross his paths there.
Oh, so one of the The famine is just working at the gas station. Okay. Because I guess
Mm-hmm.
we've all got to make money. We all got to make a living.
Mm-hmm. Yep. He's also been, let's see, has he been... It doesn't look like he's been on Twatter, but he certainly twatted out some very curious things about feeling famished, feeling hungry, making cheeky comments about the depletion of the water supply, some of the resources we've begun lacking.
Huh. Okay, so then you suspect then that he has something to do with that, then, yes?
Actually, did you have a chance to check out the malware on your tablet?
I, I'm not exactly sure what to, is it
There is an
my,
app called Faceless on your tablet.
oh,
Or let me double
okay.
check here.
Now, are we talking
Yes.
about,
If you have a pixel
okay.
pad, I should say.
Ah, right,
Specifically.
okay. Yes, I see it.
It's
Understand
it's
that
taken
hearing
a
these
couple of
words-
different forms, and you may want to watch some of these a little later, but the second transmission actually features Cian McNulty, which for a lot of people who were not abreast of his, running astray of the Marshal's Department, were quite surprised to see him in that video. And especially with as I don't want to say superstitious, but very curious as the Faceless are, them dabbling with or seeking audience with those who are presumed to be vessels of the horsemen of the apocalypse doesn't seem too far off their MO.
Wait, so is this safe to click on then?
It is, yes.
Alright, this is, don't want to be, like, invaded by, like, some crazy, oh, okay, that's the first video I see, isn't that, that's the Justice.
Yes, so that is the newest. So there's a couple of tabs. There's Revelations, there's Transmissions. There used to be an audio tab and a surveillance tab, but those aren't there anymore. The audio was a strange, shrill beeping sound where if you put it in a spectrometer, the visualization of those sounds says soon. And then the surveillance tab had a lot of photographs of satellite clusters that you'll likely see around the city.
Yeah.
Those same
Is that
satellite
what that
clusters.
map is for?
That is correct, yes.
Okay.
What's wrong with being a picky
Okay, so
terrorist?
what is the purpose of this? Are they trying to, like...
I am very glad you ask. It could be any number of things. I think it's simultaneously sending messages to their acolytes, their assets, but also, by virtue of the way that they're phrasing some of these things, might even be trying to get more of the disconnected populace to ally themselves with the Faceless cause. Because the troubling thing is that quite a lot of the things that they say in their messages do savor very true. Fundamentally, quite a lot of our institutions are crumbling. I mean, you even noted it yourself in the text. One of the sureties that we have is, DOJ still having pending cases against people. Pillars of infrastructure, water, gas, electricity, etc. are falling apart. People are complacent and apathetic about the problems that we have and more interested in memeing and complaining as opposed to seeking an actual solution. The Faceless claim that burning everything down and starting over is a suitable solution.
You see, but that's the problem. It's just I've heard this song and dance far longer than most from various different, ironically enough, faces.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it's the go between. It's the establishment versus the uh, anarchistic order, or not even really order, I suppose. The anarchistic chaos of whatever the current terror group is of the week, or rebels, or whatever they want to call
Mm-hmm.
themselves. At the end of the day, I think they both represent the same thing. So,
I am in agreement with you. I won't trouble you too much with my cockamamie theories, but I
listen,
think
I
this is
love
just planned.
cockamamie
Oh,
theories.
good. Planned obsolescence.
Mm.
The Faceless are connected to the investors that helped reinvigorate this island a couple years ago. Brought it back from a previous round of destruction. I think this was all maybe not explicitly
Connected to the Sanguine?
Yes.
Mm.
I won't say that they planned it all to fall apart this way from the start, but if your investment isn't working out, I imagine people with the amount of resources they have would have a contingency plan so that they can start fresh if needed.
Mm.
That's my thought, but I could also be wrong.
Well, correct me if I'm wrong, but one way in which anyone could potentially start fresh is, yes, obviously through destruction brings resurrection, so to speak, but the means of which to create that destruction, I was told a couple times, and again, you can correct me if I am wrong on this, that someone had a nuke.
Yes and no. So, not necessarily nukes, but large bombs.
Mm.
I imagine you've seen a photograph of this large bomb, yes?
I have not actually.
There was, at one point, a photo circulating that a lot of people thought was a photograph of this nuclear bomb. It's not
Oh.
nuclear in nature. I used to believe that they were going to nuke this whole island, but that's because I was thinking too broadly, or not broad enough. No, those were actually utilized to blow up the gas stations,
Oh.
among other institutions as well.
Hmm. Okay, so then it wasn't a catch-all solution. It was a let's damage the certain aspects of the society at large and diminish their returns.
I
Or so
sus-
you believe, yes?
It's to some degree. I think their intent is to knock out the tent poles that hold up modern society, right? These bits of infrastructure that we, as a collective, depend upon in order to go about our day to day. When you take that away, what are people most like to do?
Uh,
Give in to the chaos,
yeah,
riot,
yeah.
fight against each other. When that happens, probably gonna need someone to swoop in and give a solution. I mean, the government's failing, and no one else is focused enough on a solution to be able to help out. Well, then, a benefactor of sorts who has the tools, the insight, and the capability to fix all of this would be welcomed with open arms by many. especially if things get dire enough. We've seen the Faceless do a rehearsal of this many times. Faceless assets like Silas Moreno go and blow up the city hall or the observatory, and then Nest Construction shows up and very generously offers to help renovate and even update some of these very structures. I would not be surprised if, not Nest specifically, but an associated business were to do the same. That's my guess as to what their plans are. I could
Now,
be very off.
Nest. I feel like I've heard that name before, but I'm not 100% certain. Is there a guy named what's his name? Fuck. Shit. Fuck. What was the name? Okay, there's a dude. Shit. Um, there's a guy who attacked. The guy who attacked Tad.
Oh, Charlie?
No, not Charlie. There was another guy. This was after Tad had absconded from New Babylon.
Oh.
And had met with somebody who was apparently part of New Babylon, and then wanted to get back into New Babylon. So.
Oh, Andy Fisher?
No.
Oh.
Gosh, what was his name? Man, Paulie something.
Polly Ferrari, really?
Paulie Ferrari.
That's a name I haven't heard in a while.
I mean, I looked at a news report. You know, I might be wrong on this, but I thought I saw a name called something called Nest in one of the newspapers like months ago. And I saw a picture with a group of people, including him, as part of it.
Oh, you are thinking of. Oh, what did they call themselves? They operated out of the Life Invader building. Stone something collective?
Okay.
Not associated with Nest, but I do know what you're speaking of.
Right, okay. I don't know. For some reason, I thought I remembered it as being like something like with an N in it.
Very likely it's just escaping my memory.
Well, then good. I didn't make you think that Paulie Ferrari was part of whatever that other group is. I mean, I guess he could be.
I will admit, I do not know any names associated with Nest, but they are a real estate and construction firm. You can see their billboard on the building over the Fleeka in Legion Square. There's a building called the Emissary that they have their name plastered on. For a while, they had their construction sign on City Hall and on the Marshal's office. That's right next to it.
I see. So it is your belief that they are some sort of subsidiary of the Faceless, or an asset?
I would say the investors of those companies are the... I don't want to say bosses, but sort of the overhead of the Faceless umbrella.
It just sounds like layers and layers and layers of...
There's so much more that I haven't even said that I know would overcomplicate this even further. It's truly a rabbit hole continues to grow deeper.
I mean, that's usually...
Here's the thing. You end up finding out more, and there's nothing you can do about it.
Here's the thing. Either it's incredibly complicated, or it's not nearly as complicated as you think. There was a lot of people back in the day who thought the Smileys were, like, part of some crazy, inane things that we were never actually part of nor associated with.
Finn!
I think at some point, someone believed that I had, like, 50 wives or something.
Now, I desperately wish that I could agree with you that I am overcomplicating it, but spending almost, at this point, almost 2 years, more like a year and 3/4 tending with this and learning what I've learned. They are very shrewd, and they operate within those layers. Now, if I can be proven wrong and it's all so much more simple than I'm thinking, then I will be grateful to learn such, I'll tell you that.
Well, I actually wonder though that based on this intelligence that you have, and I'm gonna call it intelligence for now. Uh, like I wonder if perhaps these groups are even aware of their associations with the higher brass, as it were. Like, I mean, you already made mention of the whole like investors seemingly being potentially involved. Maybe not so much the structure or the people within being involved. Does that make any sense? Am I
It
explaining
does.
myself proper?
You very much did. It really is a mixed bag.
Hmm.
Some assets are very much aware of what they are doing, who they are doing it for, and why, while others are, well, they're just simply doing their job. There's nothing else connected to it.
What about the architect or architects? What was it?
The archivist?
Archivists. Okay.
They, I have come to learn, they started out as a separate entity, but apparently they've been working closer
Mm-hmm.
with entities of the Faceless. It's why I presume they've been able to take out the power as easily as they have.
That's yeah, okay, I can understand that. Like again, it just parallels a lot of my own stuff in the past where like the darker elements who happen to do the same thing or something similar, they hear of the other and they're like, "Yeah, I see you. I see you, bro." And then, they want to associate at that point, whether they are fully in association or, somewhat. Can I admit something to you?
Please do.
Are you going to kill me if I say this?
Now, why do you ask me to make a promise beforehand? Do I strike you as the kind of person to go out killing people?
Well, I haven't known you for some time, Eliza, so I can't presume to know where you're at. I mean, considering your rap sheet, my gosh.
Well, then I will tell you this, and it may settle your mind. Yesterday, I slit the throats of 2 people, Dixie Renee and Diego de Leon.
Okay.
Like I said
Okay.
before, I have no intention of killing you.
Okay. Well, I don't have any intention of killing you either. In case that thought had crossed your mind at any point today.
I
Granted.
will assure you even further, I don't take lightly what I did yesterday. They have been actively participating in something that has been maiming and killing people and acting like they are self-righteous, bastardizing something that very much stands against what they are doing.
Well,
That's why I did
regardless,
what I did.
it sounds like you had your get back on Diego.
Revenge is a poison, but yesterday I did drink it in full.
Understandable. So there's a couple of things I kind of want to admit to you. But I will tell you this right off the bat. I have no association with the Faceless. However,
She
I
knows you
did
work
have
with the fire
associations
starters.
with the fire starters.
Yep.
Does that name mean anything to you?
I've been told.
I don't even know if they're actually active these days.
They
but
have been posting again recently, I will
have
say.
they?
Under a different account name.
I see. Okay, well, I haven't had any contact with them in quite some time, but I was associated for a little bit uh, during the time when I was going about the place, mm, causing some mischief and mayhem when Ursula was taken control of by
Mm,
what's his name? You know,
Lucian.
Lucian.
Mm.
Like that was it. He's the one person who managed to get me to come back almost entirely to my full station um for a time, and I had to make a lot of moves and do a lot of things to establish myself in such a way before I struck back against him and his people. And that included an association with the Firestarters. They had an offer, and of course I took it naturally because I had a lot of things to take care of during that period of time. But to be blunt, nothing really ever came of it.
You did what you could. And I can empathize with why.
Right. Well, that's one reason why I ask, the question of do you intend to kill me? Because it's just like if I say something like that.
I think there's nuance to it, right? Fire
Yeah.
starters, at least on the surface, had an ideological bend that they were working towards, and for most people, there wouldn't be such an obvious connection that they were being bankrolled by agents of the Faceless.
Hmm. I was told in meetings that there was like a chessboard and people that I could potentially meet along the way. But like again, it's like nothing ever really came of it. And I'm a very antisocial person, so at the end of the day, I kind of would rather people reach out to me than me reach out to them, and because of that reason, I lose a lot of associations.
I very much understand. That's kind of their classic MO where they present an almost MLM sort of thing. Like, oh, if you do all of this base level stuff for us, you'll work up the ranks and you'll get to meet the truly important people. And really, it's just going to be White Mask or Red Mask number 7 who's probably going to die in 3 days because they can't fly a goddamn helicopter.
Mm.
Not to
I
be so
once had an
crass about the
opportunity.
loss of life, but oh, really?
I once had an opportunity to have a helicopter flown in to take care of a situation, but unfortunately, the person that I was trying to take care of, got one over on me. So
Ah,
it unfortunately didn't go the way I'd wanted it to go. But it would have been so cool, a helicopter, Eliza, a helicopter coming in to pick up a package of mine that I wanted delivered. It would have been so
it
cool,
would
but
have
it
been
didn't
really
happen.
cool. Maybe one day.
Maybe one day. Maybe one day. Um, I wasn't entirely finished though either with the admissions that I wanted to make to you, just to kind of, I guess, be transparent with you at this point, because at this stage of the game, I feel like transparency is key instead of me just, not saying anything. Because if I just don't say anything, then if my name suddenly came up, then you'd be like, oh my gosh, I spoke to Kenneth and I told him all this stuff.
I'll listen.
Uh, Actually, what I was going to admit to you next actually has nothing to do with any of the stuff with the Firestarters, though. It was actually more or less there was a point.
Where he wanted her dead?
There was a point where I was considering the possibility of. Again, I ask you not to be offended by this. I was
He's gonna
considering the
kill her?
possibility of what would happen if I had to strike at you.
don't take any
Or,
offense to that at all. I understand why.
and you want to know why? I mean, you can probably guess.
I can guess, because I harmed your son.
Well, yeah, but it's it's just interesting because I have a way of looking at things that other people don't, in the sense that, well, I tend to overthink things. I tend to think about all the possibilities, all the nuances, as you yourself have pointed out, about everything. And my deductions have sort of come to the conclusion in a lot of cases that when something happens to a child of mine, it's usually their own fault.
Damn. I think if you said something like this to me a year ago, I would have crashed out and freaked out at you and made up a bunch of excuses as to why I was in the right and why XYZ. Then again, me a year ago wouldn't have stabbed him, so.
Mm-hmm.
With that said, no, I understand. I learned, or I heard a while ago, a bit of perhaps unintentional wisdom from someone about their philosophy as to when they do harm. And they simply say that some people, their actions deserve it. People who live a certain lifestyle, proliferating chaos, violence, and whatnot, are basically signing up to be a recipient of that.
Mm.
I, by doing that and by doing what I have done, have signed myself up for those consequences. It doesn't matter how justified I may think I may be, I still hurt someone that you care about. And by the covenants of the universe, you have every right to want to take a sort of recompense or vengeance or whatever you wish to call it. So, I don't think any ill of you for that. I'm grateful you didn't, because I think between the two of us, you are perhaps more capable of rendering punishments, let's call them.
Sure. I mean, I could either just stab you, or I could take you into a shack for a week or two, and we can figure out, we can hash through our problems that way.
So I won't say that I'm incredibly intimate with your artwork, but I am familiar with the breadth and depth of it.
Yes, I suppose you probably would be. But, yeah, it was a situation where it's like, here's the thing. Like, I believe I've told you this before, but, like, I don't actually subscribe to the notion of betrayal. Like, I don't like, just because somebody does a thing, that I immediately have to go and, throw everything away that I knew about this person prior to that event taking place. To be blunt, and here's the thing, like I care greatly for Tad, but he has since gone his way. He's living a better life currently at the moment, which I'm happy for him. But at the same time, I knew you before I knew him. So it's one of those things where it's like I had a relationship with you, and then obviously our paths diverged in perhaps an expected way, perhaps an unexpected way. But like at the end of the day, it's just like, well, I knew her before I knew you, and I'd be essentially throwing away that relationship with that person who I actually kind of genuinely really, really liked, um, to achieve some form of satisfaction, I guess. Um, that would be momentary, momentary satisfaction for long-term effects. What does that give anybody? What do you win in that situation?
I think we are seeing explicitly now what the consequences are. Everyone's so focused on short-term successes and gains that the idea of taking the time to breathe and think about the long-term effects, the consequences of our actions, and what can be gained if we take a moment of patience. It's a lost art. Desperately lost.
And that's kind of why, whenever I did attack somebody, I wanted it to mean something. I didn't want it to be simply, oh, well, you got me, so I got to get one on you now.
Very much so.
Like I am so above that. I presume that you're mostly above that as well. I mean, unless you're not.
I try to be.
Mm.
No, there are still moments where I crash out, where I may not be violent, but I'll yell. Or,
Fair.
Maybe speak a little sooner than I ought, but sometimes it's better to speak up and take action in the moment. It's a strange balance, making sure one is wise about the decisions that they are making, but not becoming so engulfed in decision paralysis that you don't end up doing anything.
I mean, as was essentially the case, I feel like, when it came down to Tad, because that was just such a complicated thing. Just such an utterly complicated thing that
You did the best with what you could.
I never pushed him away. I never did the thing that I'm sure most people wanted to do or did. Um, I mostly just kind of vanished, if I'm being honest. I just kind of, I, I went with my wife out east, and that's where we've been. I mean, I'm not saying I haven't built some things of my own out there and done some things of my own, because the reality of the situation is that despite all the things going on here in San Andreas, in the city of Los Santos, um, I do have things going on in different parts of the country all the time. There are people doing things for me right now. But of course, this fucking city always has something crazy going on. So it's like not even like I can really even put a dent into that. So fuck me, I guess.
I wouldn't say that. It's. What do they say about multiple grains of sand? Get enough of them together, you'll get a beach.
I had actually created several more children. There was a time where we were going to sort of bring it all back here, and this is post-Lucian. That was an explosion. Don't know where that came from.
Huh.
I hear a helicopter. That's a pink helicopter.
Oh.
You know that helicopter?
I don't.
Hmm.
Well, looks like it's nothing we have to worry about at the present, hopefully.
Feel free to share, in case.
I might get kidnapped by the Faceless. It's kind of up in the air at the moment. Either I am check mark number 1 on the Faceless's list of people to take. I'm no longer convinced that they want me dead, otherwise they would have done that long before now. Either that, or I am but a gnat on their periphery and they don't give a shit. I've seen what they do to people that they take but do not kill. And while I feel as though I have strengthened my metal considerably over the past few months, I don't have an interest in testing it right now.
Well, the implication behind that statement suggests a very specific thing.
What's that?
Well, considering the ones you say that they keep, you don't like the effects of what they become, or however way you worded it. Said a whole lot.
People who end up being rescued or released from their custody are either missing limbs, missing organs, or missing other aspects of themselves.
But they're mentally still there, yes?
You could argue, for some of them, yes.
I don't mean PTSD.
No, I know what you mean,
Mm-hmm.
to some degree. Like, are they themselves? Sure. If you speak to Miguel, he'll respond to Miguel. If you speak to Kean McNulty, he'll respond. Even Barrick Johnson. But something else going on. And it's unsettling to think of. Hey, Wave! I know! It's a good soup!
Well, I suppose if you
Wave, thank
needed
you!
to take a stand of your own, against whomever
Wave, you're the goat. Also, congrats on the NoPixel Music Award! Or you, so
tries
you're a
anything
goat! You deserve it!
upon you, if you happen to get one of them by themselves, I could take care of the rest. Perhaps you could have some control for a change.
We'll see. In regards to martial abilities, they are certainly leagues above what I can even imagine. With that said, regrettably, my time grows short on this day.
Very well.
But, as always, it is a distinct delight to catch up with you.
You as well. I hope that you can manage to pull yourself out of this rut and come out the other side, hopefully stronger than you've ever been. And perhaps I can meet you there, wherever that is.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I don't know if I'm going to be around all that much, but if you ever do wish to reach out, you know my number. Can't promise I'll always be around, but maybe I'll stretch my legs a little bit here and there.
Good. Well, this doesn't necessarily need to be said, but I'll say it anyways. I hope you stay safe in the meantime. Both you and Ursula.
Of course.
And Mr. Moida.
Yes. I'll let them know you said hi.
With that said, Kiflam, Kenneth, always a pleasure.
If Eliza.